The most telling mental health indicator in this case emerges from reports of a sudden explosive reaction during a social gathering that escalated from a verbal conflict to lethal violence in seconds. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and in this episode of The Clinical File, I'll examine the mental health indicators and psychological layers of the Steven Tyler Whitehead case. This analysis is based on my speculations. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. One element that stands out immediately is the potential red flag. The speed which the verbal disagreement turned into gunfire suggests difficulties with impulse control under intense emotional arousal. When people struggle to regulate anger or fear in the moment, small conflicts can spiral rapidly because the brain's threat response overrides rational decision-making. A friend of Whitehead spoke to reporters shortly after the incident and expressed concern that mental health issues may have influenced his judgment that night. This comment points to a broader question about underlying emotional regulation challenges that could have played a role in how events unfolded. The most jarring aspect remains how a late-night bonfire among young people ended with one teenager dead and 3 others wounded from gunfire. What psychological factors might push someone to reach for a weapon in a crowded social setting rather than walk away or seek de-escalation? Stay with me because by examining the behavioral sequence, the context of the altercation, and possible mental health patterns, we can gain insight into why such an outcome occurred and what it reveals about human responses to perceived threats. On January 29, 2026, Steven Tyler Whitehead was released from the Jefferson County Jail after posting a $330,000 bond. He now wears an electronic monitoring device as a condition of his release while awaiting trial. Whitehead faces 1 count of murder in the death of an 18-year-old Kimber Mills and 3 counts of attempted murder for wounding 3 other individuals. This development marks the latest update in a case that began in the early hours of October 19, 2025. Deputies from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office responded around 12:24 a.m. to Highway 75 in Pinson, Alabama. The location was a wooded area known locally as The Pit, where a bonfire party was underway. Reports indicate that a verbal argument started among the attendees. This dispute quickly became physical. Whitehead, then 27 years old, allegedly fired multiple shots during the altercation. Kimber Mills, a senior at Cleveland High School, sustained fatal injuries. She was taken off life support several days later, and her organs were donated, saving multiple lives, including a heart transplant of a young child. 3 others were wounded, and one of them a teenager. 2 additional individuals, Silas McKay, 21, and Hunter McCulloch, 19, were later arrested and charged with third-degree assault in connection with their alleged roles in the physical fight. Whitehead was initially charged with 3 counts of attempted murder, each carrying a $60,000 bond. After Mills passed away, prosecutors added a murder charge on October 22, 2025. A grand jury indicted him in November 2025 on 1 count of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. From a psychological perspective, the escalation from the words to physical contact to lethal force raises questions about threat perception and emotional flooding. When someone feels cornered or attacked, the amygdala can hijack higher reasoning areas of the brain. This leads to a fight response that feels like the only option in the moment. If underlying issues such as past trauma, anxiety, or poor anger management exist, these can amplify the intensity of the response. We don't have public records detailing Whitehead's personal history or any prior mental health treatment. However, the friend's comment about possible mental health concerns offers a glimpse into how those close to him viewed his behavior. Overconfidence in one's ability to handle conflict without consequences sometimes appears in cases where individuals carry firearms to social events. The decision to bring a gun to a bonfire party already suggests a heightened sense of needing protection or control in unpredicted social settings. This can stem from generalized anxiety about safety or past experiences that reinforce the belief that violence might become necessary. When the argument turned physical, the perceived threat may have triggered an automatic defensive reaction. The shots fired struck multiple people, indicating rapid, uncontrolled discharge rather than a precise targeting. Such patterns align with panic-driven responses where rational aim gives way to overwhelming fear or rage. Kimber Mills reportedly died after being shot while others attempted to shield her. This detail highlights the tragic randomness that can occur when impulse overrides judgment. From a mental health viewpoint, one key red flag involves the inability to de-escalate or remove oneself from a volatile situation. People with a strong emotional regulation skills typically create distance when tensions rise. Here, the opposite occurred. The individual remained engaged until the point of lethal force. This pattern sometimes connects to difficulties in recognizing rising arousal levels in oneself or others. Another angle considers betrayal or rejection sensitivity. If the argument involved perceived disrespect or humiliation in front of peers, that could intensify the emotional reaction. Social rejection activates pain centers in the brain, similar to physical injury. For someone already vulnerable, that pain might fuel an aggressive outburst as a way to regain control or restore self-worth. We see this dynamic in various violent incidents where the public embarrassment becomes the tipping point. The presence of alcohol or other substances at a late-night party could have further impaired judgment. While not confirmed in official reports, parties of this nature often involve drinking, which lowers inhibitions and worsens impulse control. And when combined with emotional dysregulation, the risk multiplies. After the shooting, Whitehead was arrested quickly. The investigation moved forward with charges that reflected the severity of the outcomes. His release on bond in early 2026 allows him to await trial outside custody with monitoring. This step in the legal process reminds us that charges represent accusations, not final determinations of guilt. The case continues to raise questions about accountability, self-defense claims, and the role of mental health in violent outcomes. Some observers have pointed to videos of the incident that allegedly show others antagonizing Whitehead before shots were fired. These claims remain unverified in court, but contribute to public discussion about the sequence of events. From a counseling perspective, cases like this underscores the importance of early intervention for anger management or trauma processing. When people learn skills to pause during heated moments, recognize bodily signs of escalation, and choose alternatives to aggression, tragedies can sometimes be prevented. Unfortunately, those tools were not enough here. The psychological impact on survivors and the community also deserves attention. Witnessing gunfire at a social event can lead to lasting symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Survivors may experience hypervigilance, nightmares, or avoidance of gatherings. The loss of Kimber Mills, a young woman with dreams of becoming a nurse, leaves a profound void. Yet her organ donation reflects her generosity even in the face of tragedy. If this breakdown of escalation patterns and possible emotional regulation challenges gave you a clearer view of how quickly things can spiral, I'd love to keep bringing you these analyses. Subscribe if you want the next one to land in your feed. That way you'll always have the psychological context ready when other cases raise hard questions about human behavior. And it's free. It only takes 2 seconds, and it helps me keep making content that really matters. The overconfidence in managing a firearm during high-stress conflict stands out as another factor. Individuals sometimes believe they can control a weapon precisely under pressure, but the reality often proves otherwise, as rapid firing and panic leads to unintended victims. This mismatch between perceived confidence and actual outcome appears frequently in cases involving impulsive violence. The choice of a location, a remote wooded area for a party, may have contributed to a false sense of privacy or reduced consequences. People sometimes act more boldly when they believe fewer witnesses or slower response times exist. Yet law enforcement arrived promptly, showing that assumption rarely holds. As someone who spends way too much time studying these patterns, I find it striking how often small decisions compound into irreversible harm. The argument itself remains a central trigger. Without knowing the exact words exchanged, we can still observe the verbal conflict escalated to physical contact. At that point, the nervous system likely shifted into survivor mode. Fight responses prioritize immediate action over long-term consequences. This biological reality explains why rational appeals often fail in the heat of the moment. If underlying mental health struggles were present, they could have made a de-escalation even harder. The friend's concern about judgment being affected points to possible unrecognized distress. Many people mask ongoing issues until a crisis forces them into view. Prevention efforts focus on normalizing conversations about mental health before crises occur. The legal proceedings will determine responsibility under the law, but from a mental health lens, the case illustrates how quickly unregulated emotions can override everything else. The bond release allows Whitehead to prepare his defense while monitored. Trial preparation often includes evaluations that could explore psychological factors more deeply. But until then, the community continues to process the loss. Kimber Mills's memory endures through those she helped and those who loved her. Cases like this remind us that behind every headline stands real human suffering on all sides. Understanding the psychological layers does not excuse actions, but it does help explain them. It also encourages better support systems for emotional regulation and conflict resolution. If nothing else, these stories push us to pay closer attention to warning signs in ourselves and others. The sequence of events shows how one poor decision can lead to devastating ripple effects. The psychological insight here lies in recognizing that impulse control is a skill, not a given. When it falters under stress, the results can change lives forever. If this case made you reflect on how fragile those controls can be, hit subscribe so we can keep examining these patterns together. No dramatic plea, just a quiet request to stick around for more breakdowns. Here we have a pretty clear example of how somebody reacted instead of responded. I teach my clients all the time about the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is when your emotions take over and they control your behavior. Responding is when you can take a deep breath and step back and pause, and you are in control of your emotions. Here, Whitehead was reactive. His emotions got the best of him in a very lethal way, and so many lives were changed forever in a moment. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements in Whitehead or others that stood out to you? Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.